We are not robots, we are not AI, we are human beings with emotions. And rather than suppressing them and trying to brush them under the surface, I strongly believe in intentionally creating a space for that and understanding and seeing ourselves as whole human beings with our needs and desires and hurt feelings.
Welcome to the 5th episode of Once Upon a Student. Today we have a wonderful guest with us. It's Sophie Zechmeister, and her story is all about transformation. Tell me more about your journey from a lone wolf to becoming an expert and a leading voice in community building.
Most of us are not fully on one side of the spectrum when it comes to introversion, extroversion, but we're a mix of both and we hold both in us. Do I want to be in that little safety little bubble? Or do I want to be in a space where I can actually grow through the connections that I build with people around me?
Don't you find it scary looking at the world, how much exclusion we also have in the world? I mean,
I'm terrified.
How do you prevent communities to go in that direction?
Focusing on your why and making your why a positive thing and not a negative thing. A why that goes against something is not powerful.
Amen to that. And what legacy would you like to leave behind?
I will give you a very honest and very personal answer, and I think for me it's just to live a very full life. I think in the end that's all we can aspire to. Like, I have a tattoo on my arm that says Game of Joy because I truly believe that our life is a game of joy, that we're playing for moments where we feel connected to the people in our lives, where we feel connected to the experiences that we're having, where we feel like we're authentically expressing ourselves. And I think more than anything else, I wanna live a life where I hold true to those values.
Welcome to the 5th episode of Once Upon a Student, a place where we uncover the untold stories of extraordinary individuals. Today we have a wonderful guest with us. It's Sophie Zechmeister, and her story is all about transformation. Sophie started out as the typical lone wolf, the type who would rather bury her head in a book rather than mingle with the crowd. But here's the twist. She's one of the leading voices in community building, shaking up how we think about connection in both life and business. And her story isn't your typical climb to the top. It's raw, it's emotional, and it's real, and full of moments that will make you rethink how you approach relationships and networks. Whether you're a driven entrepreneur building your empire or someone who's ever felt like an outsider looking for belonging, Sophie's journey is proof that mastering the art of connection changes everything. Sophie, it's a pleasure to have you here as my guest.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for this intro. I think my head just exploded. So really, thank you for having me. I'm excited for our talk.
I'm excited as well. And Sophie, you described yourself as a natural individualist. And when I read that, I also connected with that because my journey started similarly. Like, I'm a total introvert. Mm-hmm. So tell me more about your journey from a lone wolf to becoming an expert and a leading voice in community building.
So I think our experience is very common. I think most of us are not fully on one side of the spectrum when it comes to introversion, extroversion, but we're a mix of both and we hold both in us. And for me, for a long time, it was just the easiest to kind of create that little safe bubble for me where I couldn't be disturbed. Because very often, like, outside voices, people in my surroundings were perceived by me as a threat. Like, I was bullied quite severely when I was a child in kindergarten, in primary school. And of course, that leaves scars. And you find ways of coping with that often aren't even that healthy because you're just desperately looking to feel some sort of agency, to feel like you're in control of the relationships in your life. And you go to different lengths to get that back. And for me, I know that was very much part of my journey. And my journey was both retreating into myself and then also building connections that were maybe not fully authentic. And for me, there were many switch ups when it came to that. But I think one transformative experience was actually my high school experience. I went to high school in Vienna, even though I'm from Burgenland, and I went to a school where suddenly people were celebrated for their differences. There were so many extraordinary people there as well who one had immense skills in sciences, maths, etc., and people were super talented in languages. And rather than pitting people against each other, the school really supported us in looking for complementary traits and how we could build things, create projects together to realize our passions, our dreams, with the support system and with the help of others who had complementary skill sets. And I think for me, that is one of my core principles of community building as well. And we'll get to that, is understanding when you have a common purpose, when you have a complementary purpose, and how to work with that. And I know that I had an immense privilege of having access to such an educational system. And I really wish more people would have that, to have that privilege of being able to explore your talents, your strengths, and seeing that other people do the same, especially in those transformative years of like 14 to 18.
Thank you for sharing that aspect. I can understand you somehow, because the first years in high school for me were difficult as well. It was difficult to find like real connection in the beginning, and you felt somehow like an outsider. Even though you had your friends, you didn't feel like you're belonging 100% there. And was there a specific moment in high school or a specific person that has inspired you to rethink your safety net, how you described it?
Oof, very much so. So I think there's definitely more than one person, but there's one person in particular I really want to call out, because it's my best friend of 17 years. Like, she has been with me through, I think, like 7 different personalities that I've explored in my life, and vice versa. And she, for me, was like really one of my biggest support systems. And she's not a standalone person. There have been many others as well. But I want to mention her because, like, for us, our friendship was so fundamental in the way we see the world that we wrote a book together to celebrate the power of friendship. So, yeah, but she's one of many amazing people.
It's amazing having such a friendship, especially such a long-lasting friendship. And we will come to your book later on, but now I would like to ask you a question about your TEDx talk, which went quite viral, where you spoke about the importance of communities and especially its role in our personal well-being. Can you share a specific story or a moment where you realized, hey, being part of a community makes me so much stronger and more confident?
Again, many. But I think I want to touch upon something that I said before, is that in order to find ways to cope with the threats that sometimes outside people also present to you, and the threats to your personal well-being, it can be easy to retreat. And again, like, I had phases in my life, and I still have that, where I build myself a cozy little bubble where I feel like no one can come to me, and I can retreat into that, and I can feel safe. But that's not the place where you grow. Where you grow is in the spaces of friction. And it's always the people who we have the closest relationships to that create those frictions in our lives. It's the colleagues who give you honest and critical feedback and challenge you to look at your work differently. It's your partner who challenges you to look at your patterns and dive deeper into your own psyche than you probably feel comfortable with. And it's our family who pushes our buttons. It's our friends who do all of that. And for me, it's also very much about, do I want to be in that little safety little bubble? Or do I want to be in a space where I can actually grow through the connections that I build with people around me? And I think, yeah, one just call that I have when people are looking at community is be brave. Be brave to go up to people, to talk to them. Be brave to put yourself in situations where you maybe don't feel as comfortable, and trust that you have the skills and you have the strength to actually go through that. And I think only the people in your life can teach you that.
And also, don't judge yourself, I
Oof.
guess. Because at the beginning, you made so many mistakes.
Yes, but everyone does. And that's so normal. That's part of the journey.
Yeah, I still remember, like, I had my first presentation, a pitch for my startup back then at the Entrepreneurship Avenue. And I'm gonna be honest, I didn't do very well. And I was very critical with myself. And like 4 years later now, I was able to be a keynote speaker at the Entrepreneurship Avenue. So
That's amazing.
never judge yourself, honestly.
No. And that happens to all of us. Like, my first business failed miserably, created mental health issues that I carried around with me for quite some time. I had one where I was like preparing this startup pitch in Austin, Texas for my whole team. And I was like coaching my team through it, and my team did amazing. And then I went up on stage to deliver the final pitch, and it completely froze. Has never happened to me before. And I think those experiences are, again, those are the experiences that we look back to and are like, wait, I learned so much from that experience.
And how have you overcome the barrier? Because you now told me that you like froze while pitching. And I think it's super difficult to get back to a place where it somehow frightened you. So how did you overcome it?
I think there's different ways. I think one, sometimes it's just very intentionally going where the fear is. And I think we'll talk a little bit also about some practical tips for networking. And that for me is one thing that I recommend to everyone. Go where the fear is. But I think it's not just that. It's also about wanting to challenge yourself to do it differently and to do it better. And I think the key part of that is to do it differently. If your old ways of doing things, if you're going up on stage and you're like, I'm so ready. Like I always used to learn this by heart and I had these note cards that I always took with me and that didn't work and that triggers something in your brain, completely change up that routine, trick your brain into thinking differently and doing it differently.
That's actually an amazing advice. I will try it the next time I will freeze on stage or something happens that I will try to do differently.
And the last thing to that is because that was actually something that my coach told me in the preparation for TEDx. And it's something I actually struggle with quite a lot because I'm a perfectionist deep down inside. But he said, people don't hate anything more than perfection. And so embracing our human quirks, our humanities, our vulnerabilities, I think that's where the spice is. That's where how we build connections, how we build relationships. And we sometimes have the belief in our brain that we need to be perfect, that we need to be slick. And I'm sorry to say, it's bullshit.
I love the correlation that I think every guest that we had on our podcast talks about perfectionism. And every one of us had a journey to overcome this sense of being perfect. And I think that's a journey we are all on. And one thing I have noted from your conversations and from your talks is that you often talk about the 3 R's: rituals, rhythm, and rules in community building. Can you share a real life example or firstly describe what you mean by those 3 aspects in community building?
Absolutely. So those are 3 simple tricks that I always try to implement whenever I build a community. And I think if you think of any successful community that you know in your life or even churches or cults, what have you, a lot of them employ this. So first up, rules. I think it's quite self-explanatory. It's understanding, well, what type of behaviors are encouraged in this community, what is okay, what is not, what are common values a community is built around. And having that clear framework really helps people understand how to interact and how to behave in that community. The second thing is rituals. So that is just marking and celebrating the milestones that the members of your community go through. So through that, you can both celebrate those changes, those transformations, as you said before, but also create common experiences for everyone in your community. And then thirdly, rhythms is just having clear and structured and expectable routines and rhythms when you meet, how you see each other. Do you have a LinkedIn group where there's a special thread that opens every Friday and people fill out over the weekend? Who knows? It can look very differently. And so those 3 core principles really help you strengthen the community as you're building it, because it helps people in your community, whether this is an institutional community, something you're doing for your profession or a sports club you're having in your free time, or if it's even just your personal friendship group, it really helps you strengthen those bonds and create those structures. One thing where I can think of an example is I currently hold the co-curatorship for the World Economic Forum Global Shapers Vienna Hub, together with Hannah Wunzam, who I think was one of your first guests.
Yes, exactly. She was my third guest.
Fantastic. And so Hannah and we also really wanted to strengthen the community bonds in the Global Shapers this year, even though it's a very strong and active community. And what is it? It's a community for young people under the age of 30 in Vienna who want to make a positive difference in their local communities. And so how we applied the 3 R's was we just launched our Hub Charter. So it's a set of common principles that we co-created with our current community, what we believe in, how we interact with each other, to the very practical aspects of what type of sponsorships do we want to take, how many meetings are we attending, etc. And so now everyone in our community, and when they join the community, they sign this charter as a declaration of, yes, I commit to those rules in that community. And actually that act of signing that charter is a ritual in itself. So for now, everyone is signing that charter. He or they are committing to participating in that community. It's an active act that they're setting to celebrate that milestone of also transitioning from not a part of the community to joining the community. And then finally, rhythms, it's, we meet twice a month, once for an impact project day and once for a social. We go on a retreat each year. There are gatherings for the European hubs. There are gatherings for different regional areas, etc. And so by having that predictability, by having that regular rhythm, people know what they expect. And they can commit to the community, they can show up, and they can actually know what to expect there.
And now one question, how do I sign up?
Yes, thank you. Because we're actually starting recruiting every year. And this year next year, we're starting on February 4th. So if you're looking to join, if you're under 27 currently, please sign up. You can follow us on our socials and we will let you know when we are starting our next recruitment period on February 4th.
Thank you very much. I will sign up as well. So listen as well. And you emphasize the importance of starting with a clear why. It reminds me a lot with Simon Sinek's viral TEDx speech.
Yes.
You have to find yourself your why. And I think it was also the first TEDx speech I have ever listened and ingrained into my body.
Same.
So can you share a time where not having a clear why led to challenges in your own journey?
Oof. Yes. No. So very, just on my very personal side, I think the question of why is the question that accompanies me over and over again in different periods of my life. And I think if there is one constant in that period of change and transformation, it's that. That for me, the core question that I always ask myself and whenever I'm doing something is, why am I doing it? And usually if I can't come up with a clear answer and I still force myself to do it, it doesn't work out well. And we see the same when it comes to communities. And when it comes to communities, I very much see, I don't want to call out examples, but I think for me it's more, I think when you think of a community in your life, maybe that you were super excited to join in the beginning, you're like, oh, that sounds so cool. And then you get there and you're like, why is the energy a little off? Like, why isn't this community moving somewhere? Why are we not going anywhere? Then it's usually because there's not a clear why. Why is that community getting together? And why are you encouraged to join? What are you personally looking out of that? And when that's missing, that's usually when you feel that moment of just something losing steam and you're not quite sure why.
I agree. I think it's also important in building companies and startups.
Absolutely.
I remember the first expert talk we ever got. It was directly the beginning at the university.
Mm-hmm.
We had a lot of positive feedback and we were rolling on a positive way until we had a meeting with our first guest, Kambis, who directly shared with us, hey, you don't know actually what your product is, what you're doing. And it was the first time where we actually sat down and think, okay, why are we doing it? And this was a meeting that has solved so many questions for us. So thinking about your why is important, I think, in your personal life as well as entrepreneurial life and business life as well.
Absolutely. And I mean, think of when you go through any type of entrepreneurial education, whether this is an accelerator or even just a pitch training, what is the first lesson you learn? You start with a problem. And that in a way is just a different way of saying why. Like, what are you trying to solve? Why do you exist? And the same is if you follow any structured pitch format. It's usually you start with the why. You start with what is the challenge you're looking to solve and how are you addressing it?
Yes, indeed it is. And as we are at the topic of why, you launched your first book called The Friendzone.
Yes.
What was your why launching that book?
For us, it was really kind of going back to those 3 R's and the R of ritual. So first up was, what is the Friendzone? The Friendzone is a friendship book for adults. So we wanted to take that memory that we had when we were children. I don't know if you had the same thing, but in primary school, all of us, we had these little books, the friendship books, and you would pass it around in the classroom and people would fill out their individual pages and you would get it back afterwards and you would look through it. And we were just thinking of that ritual that cemented those friendships that you had and those specific moments in time as well, your primary school years, your kindergarten years, what have you. And we wanted to take that and to transform it for adults and to make it a little spicier. And so what we did, we wrote the version for adults and also for the friendships that you have with yourself. And the difference for us, I think, is also that we're very much focusing on the relationship that you have with the person that's filling it out. And so for us, it's been so cool to see, like we launched a few months ago and very quietly in the beginning, and seeing people like fill it out together and then passing it back to the owner and then reading through the different stories that you're telling of your friendship in that book and then reminiscing about those memories, and you have those moments of joy, those stories that you sometimes would rather forget come up again, and you're living through them again, and then you have this token of that friendship with you. And for us, really seeing people fill it out and having people celebrate their friendships has been so cool to see.
I can't believe that's because what I see at least among adults is that we somehow forget how to ask like super open-ended and interesting questions or reminiscing back about our time. Because as children we have like no barriers, we just ask what we have in our minds. And then as older we get, the more like questions we build in our mind that blocks us before asking this. So it's very cool that you've created a book that actually emphasizes that. And when creating that book, what was the biggest challenge? Because I've never spoken to anyone who have released a book. So tell me more about the process of it.
Well, the process for us was quite fun, I have to say, because it's a friendship book created with and for friends. And so me and my best friend wrote it together, and our illustrator is one of our close friends who's an amazing artist and musician, Alice. And so we worked together in creating this. And as I said before, like I think the friendships in your life are often the spaces where you are most honest and most raw and also most vulnerable. And so tensions arise as well. And for us, that was very much a thing where we had issues together. And because you're so close, you feel more comfortable sharing that, which I think is fantastic, but you're also more personally invested. And for me, that's something I really want to see more in business practices in general, is we are not robots. We are not AI. We are human beings with emotions. And rather than suppressing them and trying to brush them under the surface, I strongly believe in intentionally creating a space for that and understanding and seeing ourselves as whole human beings with our needs and desires and hurt feelings. And I think addressing them and intentionally giving them space is something that I have also failed to do in the past with other projects. And that for me was one of the main principles of the Friendzone. And I wish that had more space in our daily lives.
You somehow also describe perfectly a new style of leadership that's rising up, and I'm totally a fan of it. It's also those are also common traits that mostly female entrepreneurs and female CEOs have. And I think that's where we also have to talk more about the topic of inclusion, and that we come closer to at least being 50-50 when it comes to important management roles. Because
Absolutely.
I think the male entrepreneurs and male CEOs would also learn a lot when having female counterparts in those positions.
Absolutely. And I can speak of myself because I'm someone who, like my entire life, I was very strongly in my masculine energy. And that was something that I believed in. Like I believed in being a go-getter and realizing your dreams, like stuff doesn't just happen to you, you make it happen. And that, especially in the startup world, it's what's taught to you, what's fed to you. And I think that's 100% true. But I think one key transformation as well for me in my journey of how I relate to people and how I build communities is taking that masculine energy a little bit back and instead leading more with a feminine energy. And what is that? That is the bravery to be vulnerable. That is giving other people space before taking it yourself. And we will chat more about this, but I think those for me are also the core principles of how you build communities and how you build authentic relationships with the people in your life. And in the work context, that is just as important and just as true. And I think for me, I saw the same thing when I was leading my team, for instance. My original intention sometimes going in was like, okay, let's get those results, let's drive those KPIs, etc. And then to me, the most powerful moments were the exact opposite. For instance, I took over, I also come from the entrepreneurial space, and I used to run the co-working space at Impact Hub Vienna, which is a fantastic space for social entrepreneurs. And I took over running the community and the co-working space on March 1st, 2020. And 2 weeks later, space businesses and community businesses
It was a bit difficult, yeah?
had some challenges, yeah. And so for us, we took over a completely new team as well. Like people had to change roles within the company because the entire world was drastically changing. And we were 10 people who were thrown together, some of us with new roles, some of us, all of us, in completely new environments. And for me, in those moments is when I discovered like that the power really lies in those moments of vulnerability. Like we had Zoom calls where we just sat there for an hour and shared our fears. And we did the same for our community as well. And I think giving those emotions space was the most crucial part. And to this day is probably the thing that I'm most proud of. Like, yeah, we had a 90% retention rate over the years of the pandemic when the industry average was sometimes 20%. Yes. But what I'm most proud of is that the fact that when we left, like our community was still intact. And that when I then later left the company, one of my team members wrote me this really beautiful letter and said like that the space that we created as a team together, like for her still will always remain like the ideal of what teams should be. And that's the thing I'm really, really proud of. And I think that's also what we see as we talk about community building in business and finding a business case for community. It's also a switch from a very masculine mindset of competition and one against the other to a system of cooperation. And just to clarify, when I speak about masculine and feminine energy, I do not speak of gender or sex. I speak of the tendencies that we have, the yang energy and the yin energy, which is much more lean back and see.
I love the fact that you mentioned yin and yang, because I think in the future we need both male and masculine energy. Whether you're male or female, I think combining those both traits, but I also think that the combination of a male and female founder is actually the best combination you can get. I have a female co-founder and we have a very good relationship, and we've already building the startup since over 2 years together. And I think it makes you so much stronger as a team.
Absolutely. And I think what you need is a balance of both of these energies, because the combination of that makes you stronger. And if that's present in one female founder and one male founder, I think that's fantastic. I think it can be just as present in female and female founders or male and male founders or completely different mixes.
It also sometimes changes. One person is more masculine and sometimes the other.
Yes.
It completely depends on the situation that you're facing.
Very, very much so.
And what's the biggest mistake you see people making when starting to build your network, build communities, or like build a good environment within a company?
Oof. So I want to kind of look at it in two ways. One, and I want to go back to what we said before, is not having a clear why. And one thing I want to still touch upon that is that we can look at why in two different ways. And for me, it's looking at a common why or a complementary why. A common why would be, let's say you really want to stop climate change, you're joining an activist movement that goes on the street, that protests against behaviors that are harmful to the environment. There you have a clear common why. You're all in this together for a common goal. For instance, if you are an entrepreneur building a startup, you're also looking to build your network. But usually the people that you're meeting that are actually relevant for you will not be the people that share your common why. The people that share your common why, which might be, I want to get my business off the ground, I want to increase sales, etc. Yeah, that might be your team. And I think they're having a common why and leading with that and being very clear what the intention of your company is and what you're trying to do here is the best way to motivate people. Like, I really firmly believe that. But then as you're looking to step out of that bubble and are looking to maybe talk to investors, talk to experts, they are probably not intrinsically motivated to increase sales for your company. What's in it for them? At this point, nothing. And so sometimes then you're like frustrated because you're trying to understand, well, how can I get those people on my side? And the same applies to you looking for a job, you looking to build your personal network. And here, I think it really helps to look at a complementary why. How can your why feed into the why of the other person? What might they be looking for? And how can you give that to them before you take something in return or before you ask something for something in return? And often like that is even a very basic marketing strategy, give before you ask. But I think when it comes to interpersonal relationships, this is even more true. And that is actually kind of now going to the other side of as you're looking to build those relationships, go in there with a service mindset first. What can you give to the other person before you think of what am I looking for out of that other person? Because I think if we go into any type of networking or socializing situation with too much of an opportunistic mindset, you're maybe coming in and it's like, okay, well, I want to meet 2 investors, and if I go home with at least 3 business cards of people that are in a relevant sector, then I've made it. That was successful. And then that leads you to conversations where you're talking to someone and you've barely introduced yourself, and you notice they're like kind of looking for a way out of the conversation. Their eyes are darting around the room, and you're like, we both don't want to be in this. And those are the moments where you go home and you feel like, I didn't enjoy that. Those are the moments where you're like, well, I kind of hate these damn networking events. And so for anyone looking to build a professional network, a personal network, go in there and be genuinely curious. Ask people questions, figure out what they're passionate about. And I guarantee you that there's usually something there in the broad spectrum of what makes us a person that you can relate to. Maybe you can help them with something. Maybe they have a very obscure hobby that your grandfather had as well. And suddenly you're like, wait. And you're having this amazing conversation rather than going home with this foul taste in your mouth because it was just small talk.
So summarizing, connect firstly on a personal level and then think if it could benefit your business-wise.
Yes, but I think even more so, be curious. Be open to many different outcomes.
So get to know the person in front of you.
Exactly.
Very cool. And on the note, we covered it already a bit because many people are struggling quite a lot with building themselves a network or even finding a suitable network for them. You mentioned how you can initiate the first connections on events, but how, as a first-time entrepreneur or as a student, can I find those networks? Can I find those events? How was your approach to finding your networks?
So for me, it was very much joining networks that were passionate about something that I was passionate about. And I think that is advice that you also hear a lot. Like anytime someone asks, well, how do I make friends as an adult? It's like, well, think about your hobbies. Can you join a sports group? Can you join a debate team? Can you join a drama club? What have you? And I think those are fantastic ways of finding people that you want to connect to. But I often feel like that when people hear that advice or even give that advice, they're like, but often that's not the barrier. Yeah, of course, I can Google tennis clubs in Vienna and join a tennis club. But how do I make that opportunity that I have in front of me actually work and actually help me build community? And here I think I would much more focus on that part of saying, well, how do I show up in those situations rather than how do I find the situations? I'm happy to be challenged on that. But I think, we're having this conversation in Vienna, so an urban city. Of course, that's a completely different scenario to being in a rural area. But I think certain parallels still apply. But in Vienna, you usually have more opportunities than you have time for. So we even talked about our days today. I think there are probably at least 5 different events, and that's conservative, that you and I could go to tonight and that would be relevant to us. But sometimes we don't. Why? Because it can be exhausting. The option is not the offer, finding the offer and finding what's there. The challenge is very often, how do I make the most of it when I am? And here, that was what I said before, is like, go in genuinely curious. Go beyond the small talk. Like, if you're kind of bored having that conversation, chances are the other person is too. Be brave to ask something that you're not expecting. And also then, if that feels comfortable for you, be vulnerable. Like nothing, and again, then we're back to the kind of feminine versus masculine energies, but nothing opens up a space of conversation more than vulnerability. And if you're comfortable with actually leading with that and giving a piece of yourself before asking for it in return, that is usually the foundation for a fantastic bond and a conversation, and hopefully afterwards an interpersonal relationship that will actually last.
I agree to a lot of points, and I would like to challenge you on one thing.
Yes, please.
Because those advice that you're now giving is, I think, perfectly relevant for people who have at least overcome a bit of a barrier when it comes to networking. Imagine you're very stressed, like you're overwhelmed when you go into a room, you feel your heart pounding, sweating. How do you can still start with networking while feeling all those intense emotions?
Yes, that's actually one of my favorite questions because chances are, I don't have any statistics on it, but at least half of the people in the room are feeling the same way. You're going in there, you are not alone in that fear. These spaces are uncomfortable for almost everyone, including myself. And there's two very practical tips. One is, don't throw yourself in the mix. Like if you look at a party or an event or a networking situation, usually your eye immediately goes to the groups of people that are having fun, that are having great conversations. You see like 5 people standing there, they're laughing super loudly, and you're like, how the hell do I even start enjoying those conversations? But then take a second look, and there's usually people in the room who are doing the same thing that you are right now, who are standing there, sometimes nursing a drink, maybe being really interested in the wall decor, and that you kind of see they're in a similar position. Because at every networking event, at every party, there is at least one other person who's feeling the same way as you are. And if you go up to them and you take that responsibility, to take that ownership of saying, I will be brave, I will do the uncomfortable thing, and I will talk to you, the other person will be so immensely grateful. They're like, oh my God, you saved me from this purgatory of pretending the wallpaper is pretty. And that, I think, is the bravest thing that you can do, and you will be rewarded for it.
It's a simply lovely advice. I love it.
But I want to bring in the second thing because that's something that I do a lot. I do the first thing too, but the second thing saves me because I get super overwhelmed in social situations. Find a safe space. And that can be anything. That can be sometimes when you already know people there. Maybe it's after some conversations with new people, you go back to that one friend that is in the corner that is also there with you, where you can just like breathe and be like, I don't have to try. I don't have to be anything. I can just like, let go. And if that's not a person, then find a space for that. And frankly, for me, that's often the toilet. Like in my past work, I had a chair in the toilet so that during networking events, I could go to the toilet, I could sit down, I could breathe for a minute, and then I can go back out. No one judges you. Find your space, find your toilet.
Very cool. Or a coffee machine.
Exactly. But there, usually people will talk to you. Coffee machines are conversation starters.
I agree, yeah. And you've now dedicated a significant part of your life helping others to build communities, build their networks. And I see how much knowledge you have already in this field. What is your biggest learning so far?
I think a lot of the personal learnings that I've had, I've shared here. But one thing for me, you started in my introduction that I used to be a lone wolf. And to be fair, sometimes that's still very true. And sometimes I can get cynical when it comes to community building. But my biggest learning is that cynical voice in my head, she's usually not right. Because, I mean, right now, for instance, I work with Urban Innovation Vienna, which is the climate and innovation agency for the city of Vienna. So we work with the city on any projects that are related to innovation, climate change, sustainability, etc. And what I've seen there is that this idea of community building has arrived in all of our institutions. It has arrived in our businesses. It has arrived in our governmental institutions. It has arrived in our public administration. And that, to me, is such a huge learning because it shows us that we're on the right track, that there is an alternative system out there where we can actually work together to solve the complex problems of our time. Sometimes when you think about community, you think of, well, it sounds nice, it sounds like fluffy, but is it going anywhere? Thinking back to the masculine energy. And I have that question a lot. Well, what is the business case of community? And my biggest learning is that in order to solve the complex challenges of our time, we need community in order to make that happen. Because we cannot get there with a system of competition rather than cooperation. And if I can just, for one very basic example, because we sometimes think that community exists in the very feminine spaces, but it can help us tackle real life issues. So for instance, we're currently building a geospace innovation hub for the city of Vienna because space agencies are producing these huge amounts of high quality satellite images that currently only research institutions use. but they have a vast variety of different use cases for businesses, for public administration, in order to create better climate change adaptation policies, in order to figure out which projects are worthwhile investing into. And we're building a community of practice for the city of Vienna to take the skills that are there in the research sector and find new use cases for businesses, for public administrations, and help them help each other realize that for a common goal. The same is happening in the energy sector. We see Vienna's incredibly ambitious plan to decarbonize, and we want to do that via the energy services. And a huge part of the plan of Vienna for clean energy is Fernwärme, but Fernwärme can't reach everywhere. So we are looking to build decentralized, or the city is looking to build decentralized energy networks, which are in a way just energy communities, in order to feed those areas of the city that cannot be reached. And what we do, we come in and we support them in hosting spaces, for instance, recently with different energy providers from all around Austria, who were all in the same boat because they wanted to implement those systems, but they were facing a common challenge together, which was related to a legal issue that affected their business cases. And we helped them get together to find new ways of A, how they can implement that in the city, B, how they can actually overcome that challenge for their own business. So through that cooperation, you create a positive business case for the individual businesses, for the city, and then also for the environment as a whole, in something that's so, masculine, to use that word that we had before, is something so clear-cut as energy provision. And to me, that is a huge learning, that we cannot solve the challenges that we are faced with without cooperation.
I agree. And don't you find it scary looking at the world, how much exclusion we also have in the world? I mean, I don't want to get very, very political here in our podcast, but I mean, our world is dividing itself a bit right now.
I'm terrified.
We have very strong communities in themselves, but they are not talking with each other.
And they are othering each other. It's the us versus them mentality. And that is the dark side of community building. And I find that, like, on a personal level, incredibly destabilizing. It also makes me wonder about my why sometimes, and understanding of, well, is this idea of cooperation that we're talking about, that I so firmly believe in, is that feasible in the world that we're living in? We're actually stepping away from cooperation. If we look at geopolitical conflicts, and we have political figures talking about stepping back from treaties, stepping back from cooperation, I find it terrifying. I hope there's a shift, because I do see that people then rally together even more when we are confronted with those challenges. And I really hope that democracy and inclusion can be a challenge that we find that where we are inspired to use the tools that we have at our disposal, and don't fall into the trap of becoming disillusioned and being like, well, it's all going to hell anyway.
And how do you prevent a community? Because there is one aspect of many communities, one common enemy.
Yes.
How do you prevent communities to go in that direction?
Focusing on your why and making your why a positive thing and not a negative thing. A why that goes against something is not powerful.
Amen to that. And what legacy would you like to leave behind? Or maybe a next book that will be about your journey?
Well, actually, that's a secret life goal of mine. At some point, I wanna write a book, but it's another book. No. But what I want to leave behind, I will give you a very honest and very personal answer. And I think for me, it's just to live a very full life. I think in the end, that's all we can aspire to. Like, I have a tattoo on my arm that says Game of Joy, because I truly believe that our life is a game of joy, that we're playing for moments where we feel connected to the people in our lives, where we feel connected to the experiences that we're having, where we feel like we're authentically expressing ourselves. And I think more than anything else, I wanna live a life where I hold true to those values.
It's beautiful. It's really worth aiming for, no? And since the Friendzone is all about asking fun, sometimes deep questions, I would like to propose you an idea to end up our chat with a quick rapid fire. Is it all right for you?
Yes, please.
So number one, what's your go-to karaoke song?
So I don't do karaoke. Like, really, I do not do karaoke, except one song, and that's So Bad by Eminem. But I only rap that in a duo with my best friend Eva, who I co-founded.
You can rap so quickly.
Yes. It's not his fastest song, but it is quite fast.
Yeah, Eminem is still quite fast. Yeah. Would you rather have a rewind button or a pause button on your life?
Pause button, 100%. I don't want to live in the past. I want my memories to stay as special as they are. But sometimes it would be nice to freeze time and just stay truly present. But I think you can do that. I think we all have that pause button in our brain.
I think that connects very well with searching for a safe spot in networking events.
Yes.
Just click the pause button for a minute and
Exactly.
relax.
Exactly.
Next one. What's the most unusual place you've ever made a new friend?
That's such a hard question. But the first thing that comes to mind, because I was actually in high school, my first weekend of high school, or second day, I think, it was the front row of a double-decker bus with my friend Bella, who I met there, talking about Tom Felton's feet. And we had that conversation within the first 10 minutes of meeting each other. And afterwards, we knew we were going to be friends for life, and we still are.
Yeah, that's a topic that bonds. And if you could build a community with 3 historical figures, who would they be and why?
That's also a really tough one. But I will just pick 3 of my favorite people. I will pick Angelina Jolie, because she's been a role model for me my entire life, because she lives life boldly. And I think with her in the community, we would do many different impact projects, let's say it like that. I would pick Neil Cassidy. He is the character Dean Moriarty in Jack Kerouac's On the Road, which funnily enough was actually the foundation of the 2 closest friends I made here at WU when I was studying here. And he was part of my 2 most favorite communities of all time, the Beat Poets, and afterwards also kind of the group around an author, Ken Kesey, who lived in Northern California and who had the foundation of the hippie movement. So he was part of both communities. So I feel like if there's anyone who can bring amazing people together, it will be Neil Cassidy. And finally, I will pick Keith Richards, because then all the community parties will be fun.
And what would be the why of this community?
I think living life to the fullest.
Amazing.
And leaving a positive impact behind.
That's beautiful. And last but not least, that's a question that also sometimes I'm afraid of. But is there a question you've always wanted to be asked in an interview, but never have been? What would the answer be?
You're right to be afraid of that question, because I will ask you a question instead. So, you know the Friendzone? A book for my friends to answer all the questions I've been having. And it's not just about the relationships you have with the people in your life, but also about the relationship you have with yourself. And so in the beginning, you have a section about me, where we encourage you to think about yourself for a little bit. And so I would like to ask you, how can you be a better friend to yourself?
To listen to the voice that is sometimes unheard. You know, I don't know how to explain this, but I often do this when I feel a burden in my stomach when I go to sleep, where I start asking myself rapid fire question or imagining scenarios. And then sometimes it makes click. The tense feeling goes away and I know, okay, this is the scenario that I'm most afraid of. And I think facing this fear is also then the most rewarding one. For example, I was always so afraid of flying. And I remember a friend of mine went to Rotterdam and I wanted to visit him. So I booked that flight and I said, no, I will fly alone because I have to overcome this fear finally. And I imagine one day before flying, we had this heavy snowstorm in Vienna. We had like so much, 1 meter of snow. I was like, Jesus, the one time I'm going to fly, it's such a bad weather. And yeah, I just was lying down there and I was thinking about, hey, okay, this is a fear and it's fun to make this out of it a challenge. And yeah, honestly, it was such a pleasant fly where I also haven't felt super afraid of. And yeah, I think I've overcome this fear pretty well now. Yeah.
I'm so happy to hear that, because that leads us back to what we started our conversation out on. Go where the fear is, because once you overcome it and you do it differently, and you're like, wait, now I'm actually going to get on this plane. I'm going to take that flight by myself, even in a snowstorm. And then afterwards you come out and you're like, wait, I can actually do this.
That's actually a principle that I live by. This is why I found it so amazing that you mentioned it and made it such an important topic. because I had a phase where I also had anxiety attacks, which have had different many reasons. But the moment I decided, no, I'm going to face all those fears, tackle on, I felt horrible. I felt like I was dying 20 deaths. But with time, you get so confident on facing all those fears. So amen to that. Thank you very much for being my guest. I think this was an amazing episode filled with amazing insights, which I will probably rehear 2 or 3 times after cutting it with our wonderful team. And yeah, thank you very much for being my guest and wish you all the best. I'm sure that we will have 1 or 2 more conversations on this podcast.
I really hope so, because that was a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much.